Welcome back to the Act Two podcast, a podcast for the real-life working screenwriter. I am Tasha Hugh.
And I am Josh Hallman.
And as a reminder, we are Act Two, a network and support group for you, the everyday working screenwriter. This podcast is just one of our many things that we do. Thank you for joining us here. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast. That way you don't miss out on any of our awesome upcoming topics and interviews.
Yeah.
You can also help us out if you like us. You don't have to if you don't like us. You can give us a rating. You can write a comment.
It's very helpful.
Yeah, it's just, numbers, algorithm stuff.
Yes, please.
But if you don't like giving back to this podcast, you can also just DM us. You can send us questions, topic suggestions. Our topic today comes from one of you, our awesome listeners. So thank you for emailing us. And you can do that at ActTwoWriters@gmail.com, all spelled out on our Instagram and Twitter at ActTwoWriters. I'm on Instagram at Story Thursday and on Twitter and the other thing, Blue Sky, at Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on X, Josh Hallman on Instagram. Good to see you, Tasha.
Good to see you, Josh Hallman. I have this week's in writings if you do, and I really want to talk about this first one.
Oh, okay, go.
This week in writing.
We got our very first hate mail.
We did, in fact, get some hate mail.
It was someone who just very strongly disagreed with us and really hated last week's episode on the Oscars so much that they needed us to know that we were extremely incompetent. And
Listen.
I completely agree. That's just what I want to say.
Wow.
And I respect an email that's just like, you guys suck. You guys suck at your job, and here is why.
It was just like, do better.
Do better. Listen, we are a screenwriting podcast hosts who did not read or watch the Oscar scripts and movies and then had an episode about it. So I get that. But I think that is why, I don't think, it is, that's what we discussed. It's why our episode was much less about our informative take on the Oscars, of which I certainly have none, and more a conversation about what the Oscars would look like if they were kind of more, to our tastes, both Josh and I, and then of course Dave, who's very friend of the podcast, different taste than us. What would his Oscars look like? And they looked a little bit like the current Oscars, which is to say, I only want to reemphasize how much I feel the Oscars strayed. I actually spoke with a couple members of the Academy recently.
I love that.
I'm going into it.
We're going back into it.
And both of these people felt that the Academy was out of touch with audiences and what's popular. And one of them said that he himself doesn't even watch the Oscars and hasn't since around the time I also lost interest, which is around 2014. So we aren't the only ones who are incompetent when it comes to talking about the Oscars. And that's just all I want to say about that.
All right, let me say something. It would be foolish of us and irresponsible to not at least acknowledge the Oscars as people who love Hollywood, love movies, love the industry, work in the industry, and exist in the ecosystem that is Hollywood. All right, we have to talk about the Oscars. It's a monumental thing. It's a national event as far as I'm concerned. It is a international event. So yeah, we're gonna do an episode about the Oscars. And yeah, we haven't seen every movie that's in the Oscars, but I thought we were pretty upfront about that when we said, hey, we haven't seen everything. And sure, do I think Glenn Powell from Twisters should have gotten better recognition? Yeah, of course. This is not me diminishing things. This is my love for movies and saying that I just wish they were acknowledged on a larger platform. That's it. But that email. So,
anyways, hit us with one.
Okay. James Bond. How could I not talk about this? This has happened a couple weeks ago that Amazon has now taken creative control of James Bond. The family that owned the James Bond franchise, the Broccoli's, they're out. So now Now it's into Amazon's hands, and it's a very big moment for. I don't know if it's a big moment for people, in the Midwest. I don't know if they're going to care, but I happen to love James Bond. He's probably one of my favorite fictional characters that's not fictional to me. I love James Bond. To me, but I acknowledge that the franchise doesn't really know where it's going, maybe, because obviously they always switch James Bonds, and it's, I love the last iteration of it, but.
Can I ask you a question?
Go.
Because I was a kid through I missed a lot of the James Bonds, and then I was a kid in the 90s, in the 80s, and I don't think I picked up on sort of the nuance of any of the transitions between Bonds. So for me, it was always just the same Bond. Like, Pierce Brosnan is the same Bond as Daniel Craig. They're just played by different actors, but I'm supposed to suspend that disbelief.
Right.
But currently, in our current timeline of James Bond, it is being openly acknowledged within the world of James Bond that Daniel Craig is not James Bond, that 007, that category of agent, is James Bond. So now we could have anybody. And in some ways, that's like Marvel opening up the timelines.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious how you understood how James Bond works.
I wasn't exactly the biggest fan. I know that they're like, listen, I know that the argument is like, hey, nerd, get a life. It's a fictional character. James Bond, 007, whatever.
Only jerks say that.
I know, but to me, there's only one 007, and that is James Bond.
It's James Bond.
It's James Bond. That's me. That's my personal opinion. Okay.
I agree.
There's other 00 agents.
Yeah.
But there's one 007.
And it's the same guy.
It's the guy. You can't.
So now it should be 008.
Yeah.
And not called James Bond.
There are 00. Yeah, that's exactly what there are. So I think now the universe is going to open up, and we're going to get, it's probably going to get Disney-fied in the sense of what happened with Star Wars. There's going to be a spin-off for Q. There's going to be origin stories. There's going to be TV shows. There's going to be all sorts of stuff.
I sigh, but if someone came to me and said, Tasha, we're doing a Q TV show, would you like to pitch on this? I'm going to pitch on it.
You drop everything.
Yeah. But I don't like it. I don't like it.
I know.
But yeah, it's interesting because I think if you know about the Broccoli family even at all in the James Bond legacy, there was always a sense of like they're going to hang on to this title for as long as they're alive. That's just what's going to happen. And until recently, there was an article recently, like late last year, that said this exact thing. Like MGM and Amazon have merged. Amazon's trying to take James Bond, and the Broccoli's are holding tight, saying, no, fuck you. And here we are. And I think it's interesting because another article that I read that you sent, I believe, was that Kathleen Kennedy is also retiring from Star Wars. There's this new, I guess this old generation is retiring. Yeah. They're calling it to live with their gajillions of dollars and do the thing that people with gajillions of dollars do, and leaving the legacy to the younger generation. And I'm like very curious what it's all going to be. I'm very nervous because I find both of these franchises that now have sort of new leaders to be very precious to me.
Yeah.
In many ways. Are you hopeful, Josh, or are you concerned?
I'm hopeful. I think specifically with Star Wars and Kennedy, I think whoever's going to take the reins is going to maybe shift it back to, who am I kidding? It's probably going to be all theme park related. But you know what? I'm hopeful. It's already happened. I'm hopeful for James Bond. I want to see more Bond in the world rather than one movie every 3 to 5 years. And I'm excited for it because I love spy movies. I love spy shows. And I guess it is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah. All right. My next one is my favorite topic, my book breakdown.
I'm ready for it.
Listeners, you may remember that nobody cares about this but me.
Not at all.
But I broke down
the
book that I'm reading, that I'm adapting into a movie this year. And I was so proud of like the 2 columns that I did and everything. And so I tested it out. I started writing the outline this weekend. I finished the book on Friday, and then I started writing the outline on Saturday. And man, I'm already through almost to the midpoint. I'm well through Act 2 of this outline.
Can you just real quickly break down again what the 2 columns process that you had?
So I took a Word, a Pages document. I did 2 columns outlined so that you could visibly see the 2 columns. And then on the right-hand side, I did bullet points of all the things that happen in the book sequentially. And if there's pertinent pieces of dialogue that goes in there that I really want to remember what the actual dialogue was or the description of something, I'll put that into. It's a very laborious process. But as I'm doing that, on the left-hand side, I am in a different color, doing also bullet points of this is what I would put in the movie. It's basically like a very rough outline. So if there's stuff, for example, in the book that happens that I don't want to put in the movie, that doesn't go on the left-hand side of the little mini outline that I'm doing. Or if I see that there's 2 scenes over here in the book that I can just combine into one and make it stronger, I'm gonna note that over here on the left-hand side, just so that as I'm going back through the book as I'm outlining, I have all my notations and my thoughts on the left-hand side, and even my like sort of preliminary outline, which interestingly, I'm not following that preliminary outline at all, because now that I finished the book and I'm actually in a document putting down, interior this is what happens. It's very different, of course, than what I thought was going to happen in my original breakdown. But it's so much quicker now to sort of like see the whole book in front of you than what I used to do, which is just reread it and highlight things and then probably like type out the pertinent highlights into a separate document. Like that just doesn't make any sense now. And all that heavy lifting, I think, up front is going to really help me on this back end, as it's proven, because I'm already almost at the midpoint.
I admire how disciplined you are.
I love this book. Maybe that's what helps.
Yeah. Oh my God. Could you imagine if you hated it and it was something that you were just like, oh.
I probably wouldn't do this breakdown for a book like that.
That's amazing. I'm not sure if I'd be able to do that. I'd have to, yeah, I'd have to love it.
Yeah.
I would have to love it. Then I'd be, yeah, if you love something, you can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got one last thing to say. Someone had passed away. God, that was just, I didn't mean to put this on like such a negative, but a heavyweight within the entertainment industry, Roberto Orsi, a writer. He was someone that you and I were absolutely familiar with coming up, like just years ago, like he wrote Star Trek or co-wrote Star Trek. He used to write with Kurtzman, right? Alex Kurtzman and Orsi. But he created Fringe, or he was one of the creators of Fringe. He wrote on, he recently did Hawaii Five-0, Mission Impossible 3, Star Trek. I said that already. Cowboys and Aliens. Now You See Me 2. He executive produced The Mummy.
He also was in Lost, like the
yeah,
J.J. Abrams and Damien Lindelof world.
That's why I'm bringing this up, is because I love that world, and that was so influential to me, and kind of still is, in the sense of like the things that I really love and the things that I'm attracted to and the things that I ultimately want to write. Like those shows were such an important part of the things that I loved, and he basically wrote things that I wanted to write. And I remember just always looking at the things that he wrote, and I'm like, oh my God, I love this stuff. And then, yeah, he passed away last week, which is crazy. I just had to mention it.
Yeah, and he was so young, too. I remember going to his company with Kurtzman was KO Paper Products. And I remember early in my career, I got to meet with them, which felt like a real level up. Like that was a big company at the time. Again, as Josh is saying, like anything that Kurtzman and Orsi wrote immediately went to the top of anyone's pile. It was the next new thing to read. And they were serious heavy hitters in our industry. And meeting at KO Paper Products was so cool to me, because it was the first time that I realized a writer could have a company. I guess they just didn't think about it that way. I thought there are producers who have companies and that's it. And writers write. But to see that a writer could get to a point where they could have their own infrastructure, their own executives, their own development going on, where they could say, I have this idea, but I don't have the time to write it. Get someone awesome to write it, and then I'll help develop it with them. And also being told by the executive there that their development process was different because it was run by writers. And also to think, oh, I could run development in a way that works for writers and that doesn't just work for producers. Like, that blew my mind. And I remember writing my agents after that being like, I need a project with these people. Like, I need to find something with them. I want to work within this company and like understand how they develop differently. And that just sounds so much more fun. So yeah, it does feel like, especially with these like retirement newsies that we've just done, it feels like the end of an era in a way, or like a turning point in some ways.
Yeah, that threw me for a loop, just seeing that. He was very young.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's move on.
Okay. Today's topic, as I said, comes from a listener, so thank you for reaching out to us. It's a really great question. Today we are talking about why now. I think we've all gotten this question. So what does it mean when someone asks you this? When does someone ask you this? In what situation? And then what should you say? Josh, I have heard this, well, it was asked of me twice just within the last week. First was this follow-up to a TV pitch that I had to producers who I pitched it to them. They loved it, but then they wanted to read it and they wanted their boss to read it and then set a separate meeting. So that was what this separate meeting was. And so they asked it in that meeting. And then second, I heard it from my manager just today regarding a movie that I'm writing. And the listener who wrote us, they believed that the question meant more like, why are you, the writer, telling us this story now? Mm-hmm. And they were very frustrated because they were like, well, because the idea just came to me right now. Like, what do you mean? But we want to do this podcast, this episode today, because that's not really what the why now question means. So to talk about in context with my TV pitch with producers, let's just say it's a show about creatures that come into our world and completely change our hero's life. Well, their question was, why do the creatures come into the character's life now? And I used to think, well, that's because that's where my story starts. That's why. But the question, why now, is actually a shorthand, I think, for a deeper note, which is, why do I actually care about your story? Mm-hmm. What about your story warrants it being told right now? Because you could pick 10 years in the future. You could pick 5 years in the past. You could pick a totally different neighborhood with a different hero. So why now? Why this story? Why this moment in time in your story? So that doesn't mean, let's say I'm writing a story about corruption in the Supreme Court, and I'm writing it because right now there is a ton of corruption in the Supreme Court. That's why my story is going to feel relevant, but that's not the why now. The why now of your Supreme Court corruption story is a corrupt judge ascends to the bench, and it completely sets ablaze what has, up until his appointment, been a well-functioning judicial body. So the why now, in that case, is basically the inciting incident of your story, I think, in many ways. It's what sets your story in motion and tells you why it's happening now, because this guy got appointed. Before that, everything was fine, everything was running normal, then there's this huge spike because this guy gets elected. So why, it's about why is this happening to your characters, and going back to my sort of creature pitch, if creatures are just always coming into our world, and this is just a small snapshot of a world where creatures exist, they just come into our story willy-nilly, then, okay, well, then the why now is, why are you focusing on these characters in this moment and not just someone else? And maybe that's because my character was out hiking because he just broke up with his girlfriend, was very upset about it. So he went out hiking by himself, and he falls into this deep, dark crevasse. And in that crevasse that no one has been in centuries, he discovers a creature. So now, your why now in this new case is because the creature is confronted by a human for the first time in centuries. That's the justification for why my show needs to take place now. So that to me is the why now of a story.
I do not disagree with you.
To think about it in maybe an example that we all know, I think Breaking Bad is sort of the absolute best version of the why now, because in that story, Walter White finds out he has terminal cancer, and that sets in motion a series of choices that end up making him this drug kingpin, right? That is the why now of that entire show. that my everyday boring protagonist finds out he has terminal cancer. Now, imagine Breaking Bad without a why now. That would be Walter White is an everyday boring science teacher. And in the pilot, just like on a whim, he decides he wants to make meth and sell it for money. It's just, to me, automatically makes it a much less interesting story, right? There's nothing driving his desperation in that version. It isn't becoming a drug kingpin so that he can take care of his family or make what little life he has left a lot more interesting. He's just doing it because, he felt like it one day.
Yeah.
And I think when you have stories like that, it automatically makes the audience start asking these questions themselves, whether they realize it or not. It just starts to weaken the premise, because now I start asking, well, okay, Walt is old now. Why didn't he just start making meth 10 years ago? Or why doesn't he just quit his job and try something more lucrative? Like, there are a million steps between I'm having an average day to deciding to make meth. But if you add terminal cancer into it, oh, okay, all those questions now disappear. I totally understand now what drives Walt, why this story has to be told right now, at this part in Walt's life and at no other time. So my story is justified. So again, that's an example of how the why now can work in something like that.
Do you remember when you were first asked why now?
I gave a similar answer to this listener. I was like, well, things going on in the world, which was, my why, which is probably why I didn't get some jobs, because they're like, this girl doesn't know what she's talking about.
She doesn't know what the fuck's going on right now.
Yeah.
Why now? And then I'm just trying to, because you had asked me, you're like, have you been asked why now? And I was like, yes, but like I can't remember the first time. Like I don't know when this happened or who asked it. And is it like just a common question that everyone asks? Is that like a default question that basically what I'm getting at is anyone who's listening, will they get this question?
Everyone.
Probably everyone.
Yeah. And
right?
frequently. Yeah. I think what's interesting is that I always forget to answer this question. Mm-hmm. As much as I get this question, and as important as it is to storytelling, this is just something that I usually don't kick the tires on. And it's something that this is a very good reminder for me to definitely do. Because, again, it gives a reason for everything to happen. And can you backtrack that reason? Absolutely. And I have, right? Like I have when my manager asked that question of me today, it was in response to a treatment that I gave her of a movie that I'm working on. It's basically like a serial killer movie. And, it's good. She's like, it's really good. You have an amazing world. Like it's all working, but I'm just confused about why now. Like, has the serial killer always been in this town? If so, then the character's reactions in your movie should be different. If the murders are only just starting now, when your character enters the scene or enters the city, then that's interesting too. But then why? Like, does it have to do with your main character? Does it have to do with something else? Like, these are questions she was asking throughout. And even though the rest of the movie is strong, it's this question that she had throughout that needs to be answered. And that would solve a lot of her problems of like suspension of disbelief and just understanding the motives behind all of these characters. So I feel like for me, my why now tends to come after the fact.
Sure.
Which may be backwards. That may be something I have to look at when I start coming up with ideas. Because, the way my brain works is I like think of cool character arcs. I think of cool moments or scenes or obstacles that my character could go through or settings. I don't think of like, well, what if this thing happened at the beginning and therefore all of my entire world is justified? That's usually not my starting point. However, something like Breaking Bad, I think, has such a strong why now, because that sounds integral to the concept to begin with, right? Of the terminal cancer.
I also think, a couple thoughts. Like, the way I look at it is, you have to set your belief system of a character in Act 1 of something. And then in Act 2, you challenge that belief system. And I feel like the why now kind of taps into that in the sense of if it's not pressing on someone's beliefs as a character for growth, then it maybe isn't the strongest why now.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there are different kinds of why now, right? Like the Breaking Bad one is such a good example because it's such a good example. It affects It doesn't only like jumpstart the story, it affects absolutely everything that happens after that. But another why now that came to mind was from the movie Twisters. And just because it's recent and on my brain, but this movie doesn't have a why now to the Twisters, if you notice that. It's like, because tornadoes happen. We just know tornadoes happen. And there are like a couple comments about climate change that like they've been happening more and more, but it's not billed as the reason why this movie is happening. In fact, the reason why the movie happens and like which is the reason why Kate returns to the field, which I think is what, the movie is about, is that her friend has just gotten a new job that gives him access to state-of-the-art equipment that can finally map a tornado, which is what you saw her trying to do when she was a college student in the opening of the movie and failed to do. So now, the why now of the movie is that this guy finally has access to this technology and it can change lives the way she always wanted to. So now Kate is going to do the movie, right? But without that, she doesn't return. There's no why now. To me, that is the why now of that movie. So it can be as big as terminal cancer, setting your character off that way, or it can be kind of smaller and like somewhat insignificant. A friend has state-of-the-art equipment, and that's why now. He didn't have access to that before. He does now because he got a new job.
Damn. Did I mention that I really like Twisters?
I don't think so. I don't remember.
I should bring that up. But what you said, I hadn't actually thought about the why now being the inciting incident. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
At least it's like linked together.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a part of the reason why I sort of forget the why now, besides just my starting points being different in my brain, is you're juggling so much as a writer. You're just trying to make things make sense. You're trying to do the coolest thing. And your starting point often changes a bunch too. So like the why now, if your why now isn't the reason why your script works, like in Breaking Bad, it could be easily forgotten. So for me, for like this creature pitch that I did, I had the characters meet a creature, they go on this big adventure, and the question was, well, why though? Like, did the creature break out of something, or did someone let it out? If someone let it out, like that's a whole storyline, right? If it broke out, that gives it a whole other vibe than, them just finding it. And if they just found it, like, has it always been here, or is it just here right now? And then if it just creates all these questions. So if I came in with a strong, the kid's grandfather accidentally released a beast back in his, heyday as a beast master in the wilds of India, and that beast has found its way back to his progeny because of, I don't know, a familiar smell or something. Like, that's at least okay. Like, that's terrible, by the way, but like that's a reason why this creature exists. Like, that's a why. I think that's even a poor why now, right? If it's grandpa, like, it has to be like pretty immediate. It has to justify why my why my character finds this creature right now. So I don't know. I'm rambling now, but it's hard, man. It's not easy.
That's why this is such a great topic, and I don't want to go back and maybe step on your toes of some of the things you said with Twisters, but going back to the machine that her friend has, I mean, that also is directly related to her trauma, right? Like, this is the thing that they were trying to solve when she was younger, or years before that, and this is what got her friend killed, that she didn't have this thing that could map out storms to save her. Like, my point is that why now is also connected to character, in short.
I'm going to give one more example.
Please.
Maverick.
Go on.
Another movie we never talk about. In that movie, they have a mission that is impossible. Hey, I did that without even trying. Wow. And they need the best of the best to train the pilots in order to do it, right? Without that mission, there's no reason to call in Maverick. I think what's interesting about this movie is they're obviously like, we're going to make a Top Gun 2. What's the story there? And I could see a version of this story coming into existence by saying, like, I don't know, but wouldn't it be cool if he thinks he's still the best of the best, but he comes in and he's asked to be trained? Because now he's older. He's Tom Cruise. He's real. He's actually aged. So what if he's not the best of the best anymore? There's the new hotshot pilots that he has to train himself. Like, that was probably the original pitch, right? And that's fucking cool. Sold instantly. And then they probably had to backtrack and be like, but why do they call him in? Because because we don't want to make him incapable of being a good pilot, but why wouldn't they? So like, what is the reason why they would bring him in? And there were probably really bad ideas written on the board until they finally got to, there's an impossible mission and only he can train them how to do it.
God, it's like perfect.
It's so perfect, but I could see it being backtracked.
Can you talk about the why now in John Wick?
The puppy dog.
Only because I feel like that's like a revenge why now. And
It's a great
so
why
crystal
now.
clear.
Yeah. Yeah, because you meet him and he's retired. He's just duder who's going about his business, leading his normal life, but he has this puppy that was clearly given to him by his dying wife as a way to say, like, this is me now, or like carry on caring and loving this creature as you would me. And then these fuckers come in and they kill his wife. Basically, if the wound is still fresh and they kill this puppy, and you can't help but love an adorable fucking puppy. But it's basically killing his wife again. And
Amazing.
That is the why now that he goes on this revenge mission. So the why now is not just the puppy. The why now is really his wife dying.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Like,
It's so
that's the
good.
beauty of John Wick, and I think partially one of the reasons it works so well.
That it has a very strong why now.
It does. It had, absolutely. It's, it's directly connected to his wife that he's mourning.
Yeah.
Somehow they made it, and not to go off on it, but like in John Wick, like that kind of why now, they really did make you feel as though these people just killed his wife. Mm-hmm. They just killed Baba Yaga's wife. That's not a great idea.
It's not great.
So anyway, I think that's it.
That's it. That's it for me. Enough of my rambles.
That was a great ramble. It's not even a ramble. This was such a perfect topic that we obviously could talk about it a lot. Like this is a prime, we need to sit down and talk about this topic.
This does feel like something we would just talk about at writers group or something.
No question.
over
Be like, hey,
beers.
we got to talk a little early. Why now? Let's get into it. Hash it out.
Yep. All right. Quote of the day. If you're having trouble getting started, think about key scenes that will be in your story. Write those scenes first, out of order. Now you're in the script. It can grow out from the inside instead of page 1. Taika Waititi. Please remember to rate and subscribe. Follow us at ActTwoWriters for more awesome writing stuff. You can follow me, Tasha, at Story Thursday on Instagram, or on Twitter and Blue Sky at Tasha 3.0.
I'm Joshua Hallman on X, Josh Hallman on Instagram.
And as always, the Act Two podcast is a production of Act Two, a network and support group for the everyday working screenwriter. This episode was edited by Paul Lundquist.